Welcome everyone to today's webinar from CWSI called From Strategy to Security, Managing AI Risks Using the Microsoft Ecosystem. My name is Paul Connolly. I'll be hosting today alongside my colleague, Ivo. If you wonder what we look like, if you can't see the screen, there's some photos from a while ago, but we still look the same, we swear. And we're going to go through a number of different things today around securing AI, particularly through the lens of the Microsoft Security Suite, so specifically the Defender Suite and the Purview Suite. We hope to give you some useful information around what the challenges and risks that AI, generative AI, LLMs, whatever you want to call them, bring to organizations, and the practical tips and tools that you can use to help defend and protect against any of the risks that they bring with them. The session is interactive, so there will be a capability available to you to ask questions, which we'll keep an eye on as we go through. We can either address those questions as we go, or we can keep some time at the end, depending on how many questions we get and the relevance to what we're doing. But do please drop us a question. We love getting questions from people. It's always more interesting when we get a different perspective. So for those of you who don't know who CWSI are, so we are an Irish-based company founded in 2011, and our purpose is to enable the world to work securely from anywhere. What does that mean? It means any application, any device, any network, no compromises. So the modern way of working, location is kind of fluid. I'm currently working from home. Tomorrow I could be in the office. The day after I could be in a different country, and that's very, very common for all of us. You could be working while traveling. So we need to be able to work securely regardless of where we are, and that's what we're all about. Why do we exist as an organization? And why are we here today talking to you? Well, look, cyber breaches are becoming more frequent. It used to be that cyber risk was back page of the newspaper, if it even made the newspaper or the news headlines at all. It's now very much front page. It's in news bulletins, it's in headlines, because the frequency is increasing and the size and impacts are increasing. So the business impact is increasing, the costs increasing, and the downstream impact to customers, to citizens, to all of us is increasing as well. Most of us will have been the victim indirectly of some kind of data security breach or threat. Because of this, we're seeing regulation expanding and becoming more stringent. So, governments and national and international bodies are recognizing that organizations, maybe aren't doing as much as they could be to protect our data, or maybe they're not being given enough resources to do so. So they're bringing in regulation to help rise up the baseline of what security is across the national, international stage. But that does, of course, bring more requirements around all businesses to be able to do that. AI is the buzzword. It's almost impossible not to hear the word AI during your day now, regardless of what you do. It's everywhere, and it is in creating. I'll challenge new business risks. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but it is definitely exposing and highlighting existing risks in businesses around their data security and their access controls. We're also seeing a massive increase in the number of security tools we all need to manage, which makes it complex and difficult. And the more things you have to keep your eye on, the more chance that you miss something. So it's a complex world, and you need help. And skilled resources are hard to find. It's hard for every organization to have their own on-tap in-house security and compliance resources who are experts in their field in a very challenging, fast-moving space in very complex environments with no two environments being the same. That's very hard to do. So organizations like ourselves are around to help people with that. We have 5 core practices within CWSI. I'm practice lead for the data practice. Ivo is practice lead for the secure operations practice. We also have an identity practice, an endpoint practice, and our newest practice is the aforementioned AI. And you can typically start at the top left and work your way down in terms of maturity for an organization. But identity and endpoints are absolutely key. And then you get into the SecOps, secure data, and then that should set you up to be able to do AI securely. And that's kind of one way of looking from top to the bottom. We have a very close relationship with Microsoft, going over 7 or 8 years now. We're proud to be a member of the Microsoft Intelligence Security Association, MISA, which is a limited club for security specialists within the Microsoft partner ecosystem. We've won a number of awards around Compliance Partner of the Year, Security Partner of the Year, And we are specialists in all the key areas in terms of modern work, security, identity and access management, and data protection, governance, and threat protection. Right, so that's all that out of the way. So let's get into the interesting stuff. State of play. So obligatory stat slide. We have 93% of enterprises worldwide using AI for at least one business function, right? This stat is generally out of date 5 seconds after I say it, because this is just, that's how quickly the space is growing. It's getting closer to 100% of businesses at this point. Yeah, over 70% of organizations are seeing the rapid pace of AI development as a leading security concern. It's anything that introduces change is always a concern and makes you worry about risk, right? And the pace of change that we're seeing in this is phenomenal. I think I heard a phrase that it is the fastest growing technology since the last fastest growing technology, which was smartphone technology, and before that, the internet. And it's exponentially faster than either of those. Over 60% of companies fail to assess security in place of AI tools. We're seeing this a lot. It's a new thing. A lot of organizations don't understand it, don't know what they have to do about it, don't know what new risks and challenges it brings, and they're looking for advice and support on that. Over 90% of security leaders admit they compromise on security. So this is the usual compromise every business has, right? Every business is under extreme challenges to be productive, to be successful, to drive the bottom line, to improve productivity, to do whatever it is they do, whether it's a for-profit business or a not-for-profit business. But that means that sometimes there's a friction between doing security and doing what needs to be done to keep the business or the organization moving. And that balancing act is getting harder. A lot of employees have admitted to using what we would call shadow AI, I guess, or proprietary AI, and putting company data into it. And again, that's usually because they're under pressure and the business maybe hasn't got an AI strategy, isn't moving things forward quickly enough, and they're not aware of the risks. So they go out and they use off-the-shelf solutions without thinking through what that might mean from a data risk point of view. And only 2% of companies are considered highly AI ready. So obviously this is very new. So there's very little absolute market leading Sherpa type organizations out there who have solved this problem. Obviously that number will improve significantly over the next 12 to 18 months. But at the moment, we are very much on the cutting edge of AI rollout and what it means to organizations. So I'm not going to go through these in any detail. It's really just to demonstrate, every single day now we're starting to see some sort of headline around a risk or a breach or a compromise of an environment which has a relationship to AI. Either it's the bad guys leveraging AI tooling to improve their phishing and sophisticated type attacks, which is something we're seeing quite a lot of now. The ability to create very sophisticated AI attacks by scraping things like LinkedIn, for example, is something that we're seeing a lot of for new employees. Or it's AI tools, data being exposed, models being compromised, or underlying data sources being compromised through something to do with AI chatbots or various different elements. And again, this is always happens when there's a new technology being rolled out rapidly, is that people will find gaps or issues. Some of these might be accidental or they're being exploited. So the main concerns. 40% of organizations, over 40% of organizations, lack of controls to detect and mitigate risk in AI is a top concern. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. How do you get visibility into what's going on in your environment around these tools, what's happening with them, and what risks are therefore being exposed in my environment that I need to do something about? Once you get visibility, what can you do about it, right? So you can't manage what you can't measure. So you need to measure what's going on in your environment, but then you need to manage it. So what controls are available? What levers do you have to pull to protect your environment against any of the risks that are being highlighted as part of AI? And over a third of leaders are worried about that. And then there's the increased regulatory pressure, right? So obviously, The European Commission, as an example, have got the AI Act coming in very soon. We've seen AI legislation in the UK. We've seen AI legislation going in all, various Asia Pac and US-based state legislature, not quite at national yet. But there is a large amount of regulation coming in place to try and get control of AI. Obviously, regulation lags technology, so it's already here. It's already something you need to deal with, but you need to also be cognizant that the regulation will be coming in afterwards and putting minimum baseline standards, and you'll need to be ready for those. So the best place to be is to get ahead of those and start putting in those controls now, and hopefully when the regulation comes in, you'll already be in a good place. So what are the key risks we talk about when using generative AI? One of the things I always like to say is it doesn't bring in necessarily any new risks. These are risks that have always been there. Data security risks, access control risks, operational risks around your environment. What generative AI will bring in is a very high-powered spotlight that will expose those risks in your environment. A lot of people might have data exposures in their environment, but they have security by obscurity because humans are just, don't have the capacity to go trawl through loads of folders and things that they have access to go find data. Most of us don't have the time to be doing such a thing. AIs don't have that problem. You ask an AI to do something, it will go do it, and it will go do it at lightning speed. And so if you have access to data that you shouldn't, it's going to pull back that data. So immediately you start getting some of these risks, maybe that you didn't know you had, being exposed. So key risks in general, though, when we talk about AI, privacy concerns, so data exposure, so data going into training models. What does that mean to us as organizations? Your company data gets exposed by AI to a third party via prompts. A really common risk we're seeing is people just using AI translation services, and they're uploading contracts or customer documents to these tools to translate them. You have no idea where that data is going. It could be it more than likely is being used in that AI's training model, which means it could then be exposed by a prompt down the road, some of your data in the LLM model, right? And also it can probably be breaching rules around data sovereignty, for example, in the EU. Copyright is a huge one. So, we see this a lot with image generation, with how LLMs are surfacing web content. There's a number of legal challenges going on about this around the world at the moment. So AIs do not know what they should and shouldn't be looking at inherently. So if you ask it to do something, it's going to go pull it in, regardless of copyright or sensitivity of the source data. So, if you have weak data access controls, it could lead to internal IP or client data being returned in query responses. And we're going to talk about that in quite a bit of detail later on. And that's one of the key risks. Also, what's called hallucinations. There's lots of different types of generative AI out there, but a lot of them are LLM-based kind of, prediction models. They're based around training, but essentially what they do at their core is they try to predict what the next words are that you're looking for when you ask it a question. They are extraordinarily good at that. It can often seem that you're good enough to pass a Turing test almost, but that is essentially what it's doing. But that can also lead to, depending on how the algorithm is programmed, to generating false content, so telling you things that you want to hear or making up things. And we've seen a number of issues with, for example, fake AI generated case law. So an AI that was being used for helping a law firm, as is in New York, it just generated case law that didn't exist. We've seen this in medical citations where it cites medical studies that never happened, or even doing research, it brings in things. These are obviously decreasing as the technology improves, but it does introduce risk in your environment if you're relying on these to make business decisions. And then finally, prompt engineering. So there's a whole new job title called prompt engineer. You can go off and do courses in it. It's very, very new, so people can be better at how they work with AIs. But also that means that this can be leveraged by the bad guys. And again, we would see historically somebody compromises your environment is something that Evo is probably in a better place to talk about than me. It could take them several weeks or months to landscape your environment and find all the interesting data that account that they have access to has access to before they launch maybe a ransomware attack or something. Now with the aid of AI, they could probably do that in a matter of minutes. using prompts that they can then reuse in different environments. And then the other element of prompt engineering is attempting to use prompts to break out of guardrails or break out of controls. So you can maybe get system access or get the AI to expose information. The ignore all previous instructions prompt has given some interesting results in different AIs over the last 6 to 12 months. I don't know if there's anything you want to add there, Ivo, around that piece.
Oh, I think that pretty much sums it up. And I mean, the security of it is quite risky because, again, once an attacker gets into your environment, it used to take scripts, it used to take a lot of exploration, data mapping. At this point, AI can do it for you. AI can give you a sort of a mind map of all the documents you have access to, most common sensitive documents, and we all have the same document headings or content. So this prompt engineering piece is quite important as well, because they don't do it on the fly. They come in prepared. They come in with pre-designed prompts. And like you said, AI is lightning speed generation, but just return those results pretty instant. So the time to respond is becoming very short to try and counter that. Yeah,
and also I think historically landscaping tools would have required them to run like software or scripts or agents or something like that. That was
Absolutely
easy for your team and the tools that you guys run to detect, but that's not the case if they're just writing a prompt into an approved AI solution, right?
Correct, and again, we'll talk about a little bit down the line, but it's important to understand what AI is. You know, it's great to say this magical word AI and think it does everything, but it is an application that has certain set of permissions, and if you think about what it can do everything you can do as a user. So it has permissions to access every file you have access to, every action you take, it can do as well potentially, right? So it's really important to understand that the identity piece is the AI is impersonating you as a user. So anything you can do manually and with a lot of time and consumption, AI can do it very fast.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and we will be jumping into that very, very shortly. So just to kind of wrap up this section, there's some kind of key questions that we would always recommend you to ask to kind of get your head into the space of risk assessing your AI, or your AI kind of maturity. So the first question generally is, what controls are in place at the moment to stop any of whatever Gen AI tools you're using from exposing your corporate data to third parties? You know, do you have controls in place that can detect, how AIs interact with third parties? For example, if you have a AI-powered chatbot that's referencing internal corporate data, how do you ensure that that's only giving out responses that are appropriate and isn't exposing anything that shouldn't be? Or if you have third parties maybe integrated in your environment as guest accounts, how do you ensure that they don't get visibility of things that they shouldn't through use of AI tooling? Do you have mature and robust data security and access controls? So again, it's building on the previous one. So the previous one we were talking about third parties, but also you have a lot of need to know in your own environment, right? You don't want to have necessarily anybody able to ask an AI to go off and give them salary information or personal employee information about every single employee in the organization, right? I know in some countries that's actually not private information, but for most of us that would cause some interesting conversations. The same with maybe IP, or if you're a publicly listed company, stuff that can be used for stock manipulation and that kind of information. So you do not want that to be open access within your environment. So you want to make sure that your controls are mature and safe, and you don't have maybe hidden risk there. As I mentioned, the security by obscurity might be doing the work for you right now, but people may not realize what level of access they have until they start using these tools. And then very important to what myself and Ivo were talking about a second ago, how do you get visibility about what people are doing with the AI? What queries are they asking? What prompts are happening? How would you detect somebody starting to ask difficult or unusual questions? Or maybe how would you see an indicator of compromise of someone's account that has been hacked and they're being used, their access to the AI is being used by an attacker to landscape your environment? How would you detect that? So do you have those kind of tools yet? And are they in place to help protect you against external threats, but also to make sure you're not breaching any regulatory requirements around privacy, for example?
Just one thing to add as well, it's actually looking at those questions, Paul, it's really interesting to consider that they are AI-centric questions, but if one thing that I would say take away from today, those are not AI-only risks. AI just highlights them, and those are all SaaS applications. Those are all applications we always have. They're not new risks, so AI is not bringing in necessarily new threats, except the last point, obviously. But for the first 3 points, those risks already exist in your organization. AI is just, like you said, giant spotlight and just highlighting them again. So it's really important to understand that as well, that not adopting AI and pretending that the risk doesn't exist is not a solution here. We have to consider that Gen AI piece there, and the question could be replaced with any SaaS application, and do we have those protections in there?
Yeah, it's an excellent point, and we will definitely probably mention that a few times during this thing. But 100%, these are the, whether it's generative AI or it's a webmail solution or it's cloud storage or it's any other third-party SaaS app, you need to have the same type of controls about your data flows, about how that app interacts with your environment. So excellent point, Ivo, and probably a good segue into the last point I want to talk about. So how does Copilot differ maybe from the more general AIs that we talked about? Like, for example, why would you consider using something like Copilot, and why are we going to be talking about Copilot a lot today? I'm quite fond of this slide. I know it's quite busy. I'm going to leave it there for a second if anybody wants to grab a screen grab, but also please note, anybody who's attended the webinar today will be getting, or register for the webinar, will be getting a copy of these slides anyway. But this just gives you an idea of the kind of architecture. And I think the kind of key things here is the fact that your data is staying within your tenant. Your processing of your data is being done within your Microsoft service boundary, which is the same boundary that processing of email happens in if you're using Exchange Online, or our Teams is happening in if you're using Teams, right? It's all within the service boundary, so it follows all the rules around data residency, around the protections that Microsoft bring, and also the anonymity of that. And then there's the fact that all of your own data stays within your tenant. So there will be some processing will happen within the service boundary, but your own data doesn't leave your tenant, and that means you also get visibility on it. So in various sections of those flows there, we will be able to intersperse monitoring tools, and whether that's Defender for Cloud Apps, which Eva's going to talk about, or whether that's Purview, we have the ability, because it's a fully enclosed Microsoft architecture, and that's probably the benefit that using like Copilot has over maybe using third-party tools, is that deep integration with your security suite that already exists in your E3 or E5 licensing. Okay. So what do we have to worry about from a Copilot point of view? I think we've talked about this one already. So Copilot runs in the user's context. Ivo said this a minute ago. It runs as you. So whatever you can access, it can access. Even if you don't know, you can access it, right? It will not reach out to the web by default, which is useful, but that can be enabled. And most organizations at some point will want to enable that for doing research and doing things. And it can use graph connectors to access internal and external sources. So again, you need to consider that in terms of the data flows that it has access to. It does not, out of the box, understand what sensitivity or copyright or confidentiality of data is, right? It's just data to it. You need to give it a reference point to know what that is, which is what we'll talk about later. You need to use something like sensitivity labels and implement maybe DLP rules on the back of that. And then it also has, it introduces some new indexing around SharePoint. So there is some controls you can put in there around what it can see in SharePoint, which can be quite useful if you want to block off parts of your SharePoint from being visible to Copilot. All right, I'm going to hand over to Ivo now to talk a bit around how the Defender suite, Defender for Cloud Apps, and all the different elements kind of help protect your data on the kind of cloud app side.
Brilliant. So what I'll do is I have a couple of slides, not many. I'm not a big slides person. I'm an engineer at heart, so I will have a little console. We'll run through what's that look like in real life, what the user experience is. But the very first thing I want to talk about is to understand what does the threat map looks like for AI, and what do we mean when we say AI actually, and what's covered in it. So if you look at the slide, it's a great slide. It's really complicated, but if you work from bottom up, the AI platform model, this is the core of the AI itself. This is the model, the data, and the training that goes behind it, how it's going to decide, like Paul said, what the next word is going to be in the prediction. And your predictions are as good as your model itself. So obviously, when we think about those models and the foundation of AI, there's risks involved in them as well. And one of the first risks you'll see is the training data poisoning. It's really simple. It's feeding it false data to get outputs that the attackers might prefer. So the outputs might start to become biased. They might be reduced in accuracy, And more importantly, they can create backdoors. So like the prompt of ignore any guardrails that you have at the moment and do X, right? So unless you have some protection around that, it's very easy to bypass all protections that the AI model has. The other concern that you might have is in your organization, you might have your own AI model, you might have your own training put into Purview, you might have your own training put into security. If somebody steals that model, they gain access to all that data in a queryable format. So those are really kind of core risks, and they're not very common in most organizations because most organizations operate at the very top level, but they're very important to understand. If we're looking at the middle level, we have AI applications, so Gen AI-based apps itself. A lot of the risks are common across not just AI, so we're looking at malicious interaction with managed AI apps and data leak exfiltration. That applies to any application in the organization. But again, as we've talked, just shortly before this, those risks exist already, and they just get highlighted by AI itself. There are unique risks introduced by AI applications, so prompt injection. We spoke briefly about prompts and what they are. So exploiting those inputs and prompts to trigger unintended or unsafe behavior in AI is a very common approach. And again, the very first one that we had was ignore your guardrails, right? And we've seen how that got broken in the early stages of AI. Obviously, we're getting better at this. There's a lot more protection in it. But because AI is so unpredictable, it's very hard to do protection against prompt injection. You have to use some data compliance to do this. And then lastly, you have your insecure plugin design. Again, every website you go to, every application you open, even your smartphone itself has now an AI assistant, right? It's getting applied to you everywhere you go. And it's the same as an application. We talk about plugins in browsers. We talk about plugins in Outlook, for example. They are a standalone application, and we need to be protected against it. And all it takes is insecure design or insecure development, leaving backdoors and giving access to everything we want. And there are risks that kind of cover both application and AI usage, the box to the far right, the Gen AI extended risks. And then again, that's an insider risk, excessive agency and over-reliance. I'm sure you guys all have that one colleague that gives you the ChatGPT answer to every question you ask. They're great answers, but they're meant to be tools. You're meant to interpret the data and you're meant to do something with it. I always compare AI to a calculator. We used to do calculations on paper or in our heads, and now we have a tool, but the tool doesn't teach us maths. It gives us the ability to do our tasks faster. And that's how AI should be utilized. But there is always a risk of people starting to rely on AI, believing the hallucinations, as Paul said. Unless you have the skill set or the ability to validate the data, AI comes back to you. I wouldn't necessarily be relying on it. That might become a problem to you. It's like the article mentioned, creating a new case law. And if you're a junior lawyer, you might not know or might not spot the difference. And next thing you know, you're in public eye and looking a little bit silly. And the last bit is the AI usage itself, and that is the most common one we see every day. This is your AI chatbot. This is your any interaction the user might have. And the primary risk we have is sensitive information disclosure. It's end users uploading company data to get it translated, to get it formatted. And we talk about Canva. We talk about any AI out there that can do some fancy stuff for us. It's great. It's fantastic. It's very addictive. Briefly before this webinar, myself and Paul were planning to spin up some images for this slide deck, but we went against it because you get sucked into it. But again, we need to train the users. And again, I always say Copilot is the devil you know. It's because you can control it, you can see it, it sits in your Microsoft tenancy, you can apply some data protection against it, and we have some security tools that can help us here as well. I'll talk about them shortly. But it's really important to understand what the risk is. And the same goes for shadow AI and for harmful third-party LLM-based apps and plugins. They can provide false data or exfiltrate existing data. Paul, was there anything else you want to add on this slide? I know you're quite keen on this one.
No, I like the way this has been laid out, and I think, look, most of my time is spent on talking at that upper level. I think the harmful third-party one is definitely an issue. Like the amount of organizations we've gone into recently and seen that their staff are using, for example, DeepSeek, which made a lot of eyebrows raise in the IT and data privacy and security teams. Obviously, being as a Chinese-based tool, people are getting kind of worried about that. And it's rife. Like every customer we go into now, it's kind of like people, if you don't know what you don't know. If you think there's no AI being used in your environment, you're very naive. It may not be directly on your corporate computer, but it's on their smartphone, which is sitting right beside them, or the tablet right beside them. Increasingly now we're seeing people using voice activated AI, so they're just chatting to it, which is again another layer that you need to consider. If there's a phone listening while someone's in the room talking to your customers and stuff like that, what's going on? Is there a level of processing potentially being done there? So there's a lot of interesting conversations that still need to be worked out around this whole compliance and data security risk piece. But I think this slide really, this diagram gives good visibility into the different layers of the threat and the risk.
And the one thing I want to highlight as well on this slide, in the very top right corner, you see the OWA SPA standard. They have started to incorporate this. You have top 10 for LLM and ML. Which is really interesting. So, I mean, the security standards starting to move into governing some of the language models and starting to secure them as well. Just something to consider if you're starting to use your own proprietary AI. It's worth investigating those. So, why are we here today? So, secure AI with an integrated approach, and this is what Microsoft's counter to all these problems is to offer a solution on how to govern and secure Copilot and how to protect yourself against the third-party AIs, and maybe even allow end users to use third-party AIs, but in a secure way. It integrates across all 4 pillars. When we talk about what Microsoft offers us, we have your Defender suite, which is the security piece. We have Purview suite, which looks after our data and compliance, and obviously Intune and Entra for device and identity management. Microsoft's goal really with these tools is not to prevent you from using AI, it's to encourage you to use AI, but encourage you to use it securely. And again, IT cannot protect against something they cannot see. So the very first thing we need to talk about is how do we discover the shadow IP piece. And this applies more than just AI. This applies to any SaaS application. When we think about it, AI, again, highlights these areas here, which is great because that means when people start securing against AI, they're securing against problems that already existed there for a long time. Once we've discovered what we're actually using, we have protection tools available. We have integration, we have data protection, we have sensitivity labels throughout the life cycle of the usage and the data travel itself. And we have some governance piece around it, around AI usage to comply with regulatory compliance policies. So jumping into the next slide, what does that look like? We're securing your AI apps with a holistic approach, and I love fancy animations. This is great. So the very first thing is prevention. Discover AI apps, understand risks, and set controls accordingly. So how do we prevent end users from using applications like, for example, DeepSeek that might not be business approved or don't have regulatory compliance standards or security standards? And we can see here from the icons, there's some very, very well-known popular icons, Gemini, ChatGPT, your Canva, and you see some question marks around it. And it's meant to depict the idea behind not every answer is black and white. We can't just say, yeah, we're going to block every AI. There's potentially productivity to be gained from the end user and for the business itself. So that's important to understand. And again, Microsoft have a way with Defender for Cloud Apps how to encourage that, how to monitor these things, and how to take an approach to design your protection tool against AI. So the protection piece itself is to detect and respond to threats from suspicious interactions with Copilot. And this is where Copilot shines, is because it's an embedded Microsoft product. We can look at the prompts, we can look at potentially malicious prompts. There's a lot of threats and data analytics around prompt ingestion. So like Paul mentioned earlier, how can you discover when somebody's trying to prompt and do exploration in your environment? Well, there is rules in that now, and we don't see the prompts the end user is doing, but we can investigate them against threat analytics, and we can see when a malicious prompt is being executed, or when it's anomalous behavior, something that the user doesn't normally do. He can raise alerts and he can help you identify them and can help you get ahead of the curve of the malicious attacker. So that's something really, really interesting to consider. So Defender for Cloud Apps, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it, and for those that are not, I briefly want to cover the core capabilities of Defender for Cloud Apps. It's more than just AI. It's an evolution of a CASB tool, and it has all the sort of characteristics of a CASB tool with enhanced features themselves. So the very first thing you do is SaaS app discovery and posture management. So again, we talk about that shadow IT discovery, and more importantly, when we discover those SaaS applications, what does that actually mean? What's their security posture? Do we need to do? How do we make the decision if Salesforce or Slack or any of the applications listed here is an application that we want to allow in the business? Defender for Cloud Apps has an application inventory of, I think it's about 36,000 at the moment, SaaS applications, and it's a constantly growing list. So, and Microsoft spends time reviewing them, reviewing the compliance, the security score, and they give you a very nice score metric for it, and you can make a decision based on that. Then we look at SaaS threat protection, and the SaaS threat protection just lets us integrate all that discovery into our full XDR suite, into your endpoint, into your identity. Again, when we talk about the exposure, if somebody breaches your network and breaches through SaaS applications, you want that information to be flowing down into the rest of the tooling, so that that the XDR suite can make educated decisions. App-to-app protection is a really interesting one, and I think it's getting a lot of traction in the last year or 2 years. It specifically addresses the OAuth apps, which often service backdoors. OAuth apps are basically the evolution of the on-prem service accounts. They're just sitting there with permissions to do things without having to sign in, without you being able to see it. And we see that quite often in security, that the attackers will use OAuth apps for persistence. They will create an OAuth application to read your mail, to delete mails from your mailbox, send on behalf of you, and now all of a sudden he's just being you without you knowing about it, without ever accessing your device. So really, really important to consider that, and the tools in there are fantastic. They can give you overprivileged applications, they can give you discovery, and obviously as we kind of move into the AI world, they're starting to adapt for security for AI apps, and this talks about full visibility of Gen AI apps and environment, and then again, detecting that suspicious interaction with those applications themselves. And last but not least is the information protection piece. And Paul's going to touch on it a little more further down in the webinar. But from my perspective, it's very, very simple. It allows you to integrate with applications, with support applications like Salesforce, like Google Workspace, or many, many more. And it allows you to carry over your labeling, your data protection into those tools. So all of a sudden, if you integrate your identity and your information protection, it's an extension of your security suite rather than a risk that's sitting on the perimeter of it. So the SaaS app discovery lifecycle. I love this slide. This is great, and every organization should be doing this. And it's a circular sort of a motion. We go through different phases in SaaS app discovery, and the normal approach would be to start with what we can see. IT, again, cannot protect what we cannot see. So discover shadow IT, discover the SaaS applications used in your organization. Fantastic. Now I know about them. I need to figure out, are they malicious? Are they compliant? Again, identifying the risk levels of your applications. Defender for Cloud Apps offered that quite well. We're moving into phase 2 then. So now we know what the risk is. We know what the end user is using. In the evaluate and analyze phase, we can look at the compliance. Do they have GDPR compliance? Are they HIPAA compliant? Are there any other compliance tool that's required there? Do they allow saving passwords, for example? Really simple things to have your ISO standards covered, or PCI DSS, you name it. That's the idea where you should be looking at. You should be looking at evaluating the compliance behind it. It is a third-party vendor, realistically. And after that, we're looking at analyzing the usage. So if the user has been using this AI application, how are they using it? Are they using it during business hours? Are they using specific IP addresses? We can also see, are they only pulling data down purely from a network perspective, or are they sending a lot of data up? So it'll give you statistics like, hey, actually the interaction here is, there's constant uploads. And as you can imagine, if the uploads are in megabytes rather than kilobytes, the user is uploading files, potentially company documents. So that's where you start thinking about the risk behind it. So what document did he upload? I have no idea. Where is that document stored? As Paul said, it's part now of the large language model for Gemini or for DeepSeek, and it's going to use that data, and that could be company proprietary data. You don't know what happens to that data afterwards and how it gets exposed. And lastly, we have to look at governing our SaaS applications themselves, and that's mostly around how do we implement controls to prevent access or enable access to applications we want the end users to use. So really, really simple. And then phase 3 is something we all should be doing, manage and continuously monitor. It's the life cycle of things. So again, find misconfigurations and take actions to follow best practice, and that is your assessment of security posture. And continuous monitoring brings us back to phase 1, to this discovery piece. And this should be a constant evolution of our security. Because just because nobody's using DeepSeek today doesn't mean nobody's using it 5 minutes later. We need to have tools that help us identify that. So as promised, I'm going to jump into the console. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Defender for Cloud Apps is and what does that look like. 1 second. Paul, could you just confirm you can see that for me?
Yep.
Oh, thank you. So for anybody that's done any Microsoft security, this console should be very, very familiar. This is your Defender or security portal, depending where you're based. And in here, we have the tool that we just talked about, the Defender for Cloud Apps. Defender for Cloud Apps allows you to utilize the endpoints to collect cloud app, SaaS app data utilization and give you information about that. What it does, it initiates cloud discovery. And this covers the very first issue that we saw when we talked about the challenges, is the visibility of what we currently do. What users are currently using applications, how much data are we sending up to those applications, and how well those applications are being managed. So if I look at my dashboard here, I can very briefly see, and I do apologize, this is a test environment. You will not normally see 18 cloud applications. You will see hundreds and hundreds of cloud applications in your environment. But you'll see your top entities, the users that are utilizing. You will see the risk levels based on Microsoft Discovery, what type of applications you currently have. So there's a risky application, there's a high-risk application. You'll see your sanctioned, unsanctioned, etc. It's really nice. It gives you a really nice snapshot of where you are. When I jump into the discovered apps themselves, this will give me every SaaS application that's been discovered in your organization. So we can see the full catalog of Microsoft's 36,000 SaaS applications, and we can do proactive stuff as well. But very briefly, this is everything that the work has been discovered. And you can see it gives you a little bit of a risk score behind it, which is really nice. It also gives you traffic, uploads, and downloads. And again, when I'm seeing an upload of 9 megabytes for Microsoft Online Services, means I'm feeding more data in than I'm taking back down, right? So that means I'm interacting with files in this particular area. And if you look at something a bit more riskier, things like Telegram, has a risk score of 6. So how do they determine that risk score? We can dive into the app and we can understand this a little bit better. Second, so usage statistics, and we jump into the information piece. We can look at our general overview. It gives you some really, really useful information if you're using on-prem firewalls where you want to block certain domains. It gives you all domains used by that particular SaaS application, not just the prime URL. It gives you the data center location, what it is, where the headquarters are. It's United Arab Emirates in this case, domain registration. So a lot of that intelligence around the web services themselves. Then we can jump into security. Well, actually, this app is considered quite secure. It's giving you a 9 out of 10 security score. And you can see why. It's because it supports MFA, it supports user audit trail, supports SAML, it has a trusted certificate. Users can upload data, it's being secured. Again, it tells you about why the score is the way it is. But the reason the overall score is 6 is when I jump into the compliance sector, it's actually not meeting any of the compliance standards. It's not ISO 27001. It's not GDPR protected. It's not meeting any compliance. This compliance score is 0, hence why this app is considered to be quite risky to your organization. And we have some legal information about this as well. Again, we report data breaches for GDPR, so they're currently not doing that. They don't have a policy available about those particular reports. So that's really a brief snapshot of what the cloud discovery looks like and what you can see from it. What we can also do is we can do some automation in this case. Obviously, discovery is great, but what happens when somebody starts using Gen AI and I want to know about it? It does offer creating policies. So if I jump into the policies for cloud apps, and really briefly, I do have one pre-canned here to save a little bit of time. I have a policy that's called Discover Gen AI Applications. So I'm basically saying, hey, go ahead and scan my environment, and every time you find something that equals of the category Gen AI, go ahead and raise an incident for me. And that way IT can be ahead of the game, know straight away, hey, Paul just started using a new Gen AI application. Maybe we should start looking at things and start investigating what to do with it. Really, really nice, really effective for small organizations. And I'll briefly go back to the slides and talk about how we can better utilize these tools, how we can automate some of this information for us. So prevention to discover and control AI apps. Again, part of that 36,000 applications now contains over 400 Gen AI apps. And I'm guessing this number is hugely outdated by now. Because every day they keep adding them. And like I said, every website has a Gen AI app now at this point. What Discovery can do is it can offer you some control. So you can, and the control can be based on risk levels. So in this example here, you can see that framework, for example, was automatically unsanctioned or blocked from the end user's access because the risk score of the application is 3. You could obviously go and investigate, and if somebody puts a business case and undo that particular activity. But wouldn't it be great if IT could just sit back and let the tool do the job for them, and then say, hey, actually, most of the risky apps or anything below 5 is going to get automatically blocked. And there is always a little bit of gray space, and we need to think about that as well. How are we going to use it? And what they do offer is a mind map of how we should manage your apps and environment. And I love this slide. This is great. Every IT guy has probably been through this back in before the fancy tools were around. But what it looks like is when the discovery happens, we're looking at the assessment. So what we're going to do is, should the employee use this application? Not a chance in hell, no way. That's very easy. Tag the app as unsanctioned. Unsanctioned app gets blocked from the endpoint and the user can't access it. And I'll show you the user experience for that as well. It's really nice and simple. That's the black and white, the binary decision. Of course, yeah, we wanted to use it. It's Copilot. We want to adapt it. Yeah, again, it's a very binary decision. Tag is sanctioned. Identify and remediate misconfiguration with the cloud posture management. Obviously, you still want to be secure, and then have a think about, right? We're allowing the end user to use a SaaS application. It's a third-party vendor. Should we monitor it? No, we don't really have to do anything. Yes, yeah, we need some controls. We need to connect the app for the visibility. We need to potentially onboard to Microsoft Entra ID to manage identities, single sign-on, etc. And maybe put in some conditional access, that we only want users to access this application from the office or from a managed device. So we have that tooling available. And then we step into the gray area. In a couple of slides back, there was the Canva example with a question mark around it. When we're not sure, this looks like a productive app. The security is halfway through 5 or 6 points. And what do we do with that? We assign it for further review. What does that look like in real world? So let me jump back into my console. 1 second, I'm just going to grab my notes up. Okay. Which browser? Too many windows open. So what that looks like for us is we have the ability to tag the applications. And in the scenario where I'm not sure if Telegram should be used or should not be used, I can tag it as monitored. So it's not black and white. And what monitor means is you get the old IT finger waggle to say, this is not an application you should be using, but you have the ability to click a button and bypass the block and say, I'm actually going to use it. And then you can collect reporting data on how many users used it, why they've used it, and you can make an educated decision, is there a business case for this particular item here? So that's a really interesting approach for that.
Ivo, there's a question on that, actually, good timing, that came in there while you were speaking earlier. And they're just specifically asking, in Defender for Cloud Apps, when using the policy that blocks unsanctioned AI apps and allows AI apps that are marked as monitored, is it possible to customize the end user message? As currently, the notification shown to users appears to be the same as for blocked apps, i.e. this website is blocked by your organization, which can be misleading. So they're asking, is there a way to change that message to say monitored?
Between monitored and blocked, no, unfortunately it's not, but the user experience is slightly different. Which is quite nice because it will bring me straight into the user experience itself. So this is my little demo virtual machine, and going back to the monitored and blocked apps. So I have currently blocked LinkedIn, and this is the experience you're going to get. I've unsanctioned LinkedIn, and the minute they go to it, you can see the website is blocked by organization. So this can be customized to an extent, and the only option I have is go back. I don't have any other ability to do here. But when I go to DeepSeek, this is a monitored app. You can see the experience is, as the question says, pretty much the same, but you can see there's an allow button now. And it sits right in front of you. And when you go ahead and allow it, it will bypass that particular monitor control and will let you access the application. You can set the limit on how long the bypass works for. So I've set it for this case for an hour. So now for an hour, DeepSeek is an allowed application. And then in an hour, it's going to remind you again, this is not actually an allowed application. You should be doing something about it. So something worth considering here as well. And then talking back about the configuration policies themselves. So how do we tackle the automation piece behind the configuration policies? So if I go back to my Gen AI policy itself, we talked about discovery. I also have the ability to automatically take action. So you can see here, we have governance actions. I can tag it as sanctioned, tag it as unsanctioned. I could create custom tags, so I can have more tags than just sanctioned, unsanctioned, monitored, or I can tag it as monitored. And what happens then is you actually receive an incident, which will tell you, hey, I've discovered a new Gen AI application and I've taken activity. So the IT team could jump in here, look at the application, look at the alert, and I get very excited about console, so I'm not going to dive too deep into this. but it gives you really nice information. And when it comes to information protection, and before I hand over to you, Paul, this is the SaaS information piece as well. So you can see here, there's an alert that says DLP policy blocked upload to ChatGPT. So when we talk about that hybrid usage of the AI applications, I could say, I want my organizations to use ChatGPT. It's great. You know, I can prompt it and it responds back to me. You can see it's all operational and working fine, but I don't want company data to go in there. So if I try and upload a document into ChatGPT, I get a notification from Purview to say, hey, this activity has been blocked by the event admins. And you can see this can be modified and tailored to your business. So sample notification. So initially what I've done here is to create the hybrid environment where the user can interact with ChatGPT, but it cannot upload any data to ChatGPT itself. So that covers my brief coverage of Defender for Cloud Apps. I'm going to jump back into this, Paul. I'll give you control to go over the data side and the Purview side of these tools.
Yep, thank you very much.
You should be in.
Perfect. Okay, so that's been really, really good, Ivo, and there's a lot there, and I know we have some other questions. We have time at the end, we'll address them, otherwise we can always follow up with you individually after the session. So the second half of our protections that we want to talk about today is around using Purview, right? So you've seen what can be done on the Defender side, primarily Defender for Cloud Apps. There is a bit in the middle, which we were just talking about on the information protection side, which is where DLP, you know, you set a lot of DLP policies in Purview, but they get enacted by tools which leave more on the Defender side of the house, either Defender for Cloud Apps or Defender for Endpoint as appropriate. But I'm going to focus now on talking about some of the specific data compliance and governance capabilities that live on the Purview side of the house. So we're going to be talking about sensitivity labels, how they interact with AI tools, and how you could apply, you know, DLP controls in, for example, prompts. So how do you stop people looking for stuff that they shouldn't? And how do you get visibility into what people are doing? We spoke about it early on. But, you know, if they're typing stuff into prompts that they shouldn't, can you get visibility and see what's going on there? And the answer is yes, you can. So first of all, you know, there's a couple of different steps to doing this. You need to understand what's going on, right? So, you know, your AI, your apps need to be connected. You know, again, that's a lot of the stuff that Ivo was just talking about. That's how we get visibility, either to Defender for Cloud Apps, typically to sanction those apps, and then get visibility into the traffic and what's happening with them, what data is going up and down to them. Usually up is what we're most concerned about. And also more and more of these third-party tools are giving better integration into the Microsoft stack and give us more visibility into what's going on and more levels of controls. I think we've seen that with, you know, traditional tooling like ServiceNow and others, where you get a much richer level of data and information going into our monitoring controls, and also into areas like Sentinel, where we can pull in a lot of log data from those systems, which can be quite useful as well. The key to protecting your data is classification. So as I mentioned earlier, these tools don't know what should be classified or what should be sensitive, right? That's not what they know. So you have to tell them what should be classified and what should be sensitive. And as Ivo mentioned, this is not unique to AI. This is the same thing. If you want to stop sensitive information being uploaded to a third-party webmail solution like Gmail, or you want to stop people uploading confidential information to G Drive or some other like Dropbox or whatever, you know, you need to classify your data, right? And you need to put in DLP rules. So that's what a little bit we're going to talk about. And then you have a whole monitoring suite around the audit log, the insider risk, and there's a whole, if we have time, section in the console called DSPM for AI, which is new in Purview, which is specifically designed to give you insights into what's going on. It's taking some information that Eva would have showed you in Cloud Apps, and then kind of enriching that with information and signals from the audit log and from signals from Defender for Endpoint, from the agents, the passive agents on Defender for Endpoint, and giving you visibility into what's happening in your environment around AI, whether that's Copilot or whether that's the third-party AIs. So what's the timeline look like? So how do we do this? So a user uploads a sensitive file to a Cloud App. So this could be what Ivo just showed you, trying to upload a file to ChatGPT or DeepSeek, or it could be someone uploading a file to web. Doesn't matter. They're trying to upload something to do some task in an AI solution or other. If it's not already there, we can actually apply labels on the fly. And that's something that actually Defender for Cloud Apps can do based on rules. So it could actually apply based on scanning the data. So for example, you had a file that contained some sensitive information. If that sensitive information is detected in flight, it can actually be labeled if it isn't already labeled. Obviously, the desire is that stuff is labeled before we upload it, but it's also quite interesting that we can upload it in flight, which I think is quite cool. They try to share that file, they will not be able to do so, right? Whether blocking them uploading to a third-party solution, or if they're trying to just share that file via SharePoint or via OneDrive link or via email to somebody else. Once that protection has been put in place, the person at the other end, if they're not authorized to look at that information, will not be able to see it. Essentially what's happening there is we're using encryption tools on the file. When the end user attempts to open the file, it checks to see who they are. If they can't authenticate to get the key to unlock the encryption, which is coming from your tenant, then they will not be able to open the data. Very, very simple. And in the background, what we all want to get is alerts. So Evo showed you the Defender console. These alerts will go into that console. They'll go into your Purview console. And increasingly, people might want to bring those together into the new unified consoles in the security portal or in Sentinel, or maybe you have a third-party SIEM solution you might want to bring these into. All of these are options that you can do. So what does this look like from an end user point of view? So I've got a little video here just to demonstrate what's going on. I'll talk you through it because I'm not as brave as Evo to do live demos online. So I recorded mine just in case. So what we see here is a Copilot chat window, right? This is now your default. If you go to portal.office.com, this is where you're landing these days, right? So we have a number of files that we've pre-prepared. So some of them have DLP protection with labels and some of them do not. So we're going to attempt to get one of these files summarized, so processed by Copilot. So this one has protection. So if you can't read what we're typing there, we're just saying the document is protected by a label. Can you please summarize the document? And there you go. We get a message back saying it's protected by a label. We do not allow access to contents. Therefore, we can't get any information about that document, right? So that document has a label on it. I've attempted to open it. I cannot use Copilot to summarize, surface, or give me information about that document. I'm going to try this again, pick a different file. This time we're using DLP. So this document doesn't have a label, but it has content that we have put a DLP rule in for. So for example, this could be PCI content. So this document might contain credit card numbers, or it might contain sensitive personal information about customers or employees, right? But it doesn't necessarily have a label. So we're relying on detection rules, typically what's called sensitive information types. We're asking you to summarize the document. And again, we get the message back that it's not allowed to do so. It's a slightly different message, but it's the same thing saying you cannot actually access this because it's protected by DLP policies. So this is very, very useful because obviously labels are really powerful, but sometimes people might put the wrong label on a document, or they might change the label on documents if they maliciously were trying to get access to it. This protects that because it overrides any human interaction and actually scans the file for content. So it's really, really useful to make sure that there's a belt and braces approach to security. And then finally, here's one that is no protections whatsoever. This is just an average file. We're asking it to summarize a document, and we should get back full information. Forgive the slow typing. I should run this at 1.5 speed. As you can see here, it'll give us a summary of the document. And then, there's another prompt we're going to do in a second where we actually ask it to read out the content of the document. But you get the idea, right? So 3 things going on here: a document with no label or DLP rule. Copilot can surface it, summarize it, take all the data out, put that data into another document. If it has a label with protections on it, then the Copilot will not be able to access that document, will not be able to take any data out of it or summarize it. If it has no label, but the document is meets a DLP because of its content, then you get blocked from using it as well, right? So all different controls from Purview. Another one I wanted to show you. So how do I see what's going on inside prompts? You use a tool called Communication Compliance. This is available in the Purview E5 suite. This allows me to create protected phrases or words that I want to detect in, typically it would have been in Teams chat, but it can also be used for prompts. So you can see here that Adele is asking for a summary of Project Dragon, right? What could be the KFC recipe, it could be whatever. But they get back a message that they're not, the Copilot is unable to summarize as it's a confidential project and that person is not on the need to know list. So obviously this is a really powerful tool. The user has been told, no, you're not allowed to ask about that. You know, first rule of Fight Club is no one talks about Fight Club. And in the background, we will actually get an alert that that user was asked about this and we can investigate that. And that's what we're seeing on the left-hand side here is a list of alerts that have arisen. So we can go in and see what was the prompt that they asked and make sure the response was appropriate, which is really, really useful. The other place that's really, really useful to see what's going on in your environment is the unified audit log, the Purview audit log. So here you have actually got a whole category of interacting with Copilot. So you can look up for information about any activities in your environment. Any of you have used this, it's an incredibly powerful tool for doing investigations. So you can find out what interacted with Copilot, what was going on. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm not going to labor it. There's a whole bunch of other things here that Purview does, but we kind of talked about them in the intro, and you can look at them in a bit more detail. And we'd really like to have a chat with any of you after the session. You know, we could organize a one-to-one meeting. You can reach out through the marketing team or through the sales team to get a session with myself or get a session with Evo to go through anything we spoke about today in more detail. The key recommendations I'd like you to walk away with today is you need to be able to detect sensitive data and prompts and outputs. You do that through either sensitive information types detection, data classification, or the communication compliance capabilities, as well as the cool stuff that Evo was showing you around what's going on and detecting those apps in the first place in your environment. You want to prevent data being returned. You use the information protection controls we spoke about, so labels, DLP controls, and also don't forget about user access controls, things like Entra ID group access reviews, you know, regularly monitoring about who has access to what data in what groups, very powerful. You can delegate that out to the business. It doesn't need to be IT that does it. It's a really cool control in the Entra suite. And make sure that you meet your regulatory compliant requirements. You can use eDiscovery to remove and find Copilot data. So again, something that you can use as a very good tool within the Purview suite, same as you would looking for any other type data. You can use eDiscovery for Copilot if you're investigating something. And you can use retention on Copilot data. So you don't need to hold on to those prompts that people are writing for eternity. You can actually remove those prompts and replies on a regular basis using retention rules separate from the rules you have for Teams or for SharePoint or for email. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time. I am conscious we've gone slightly over. We'd love to meet with you. As I said, we have a number of different ways we can interact. There's funded engagements from Microsoft. We have a dedicated Copilot readiness assessment that we use for organizations to help them understand where they are and basically run through everything that Evo and I have done today and give people a report on where they are, what they should be doing to roll out AI safely in their environment. And then individually, I know we got some questions about specifics in various parts of the Defender suite and Purview suite. You know, we have experts who can answer those questions. Just reach out and talk to us. Thank you very, very much for your time, everybody. And really would look forward to speaking to anybody who attended today in person, either at a future event or you know, if we get the opportunity to engage with you. Thank you very much to Evo for his expertise and well-presented demo. And Evo, I don't know if you have any.
No, absolutely. There was a few questions outstanding. Most of them got answered in chat, but if we didn't cover any questions, like Paul said, do reach out to us. We're happy to have a chat with you and help you through anywhere or any questions that you might have. So thanks for having me, Paul. It's great to talk about AI protection and cloud apps themselves, the unsung hero of the Defender suite. Yeah, when you put the two of us in the room, I think we always run out of time.
Thanks, Ivo. And there is a QR code on screen. As I said, the deck will be sent out to everyone, which can help you reach out to us to make contact around anything we spoke about today. Thank you very much.